That's why we bring you the most wonderful experts and experienced moms and career women to talk about how they are thriving to this. My guest is the lovely Amanda Robertson, mom of two, professional engineer. She's been in the pros and babes community for years now, and we're going to talk about how she's thrived through the motherhood transitions and health challenges, dealing with inappropriate comments at work, right? And building her dream life, because Amanda is so intentional about the life she's building as a mom and as a career woman. So welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Kenya.
Thanks for joining us today and taking time out of your really busy schedule.
For sure. Yeah, sometimes life feels chaotic, but yeah, I guess we'll get down to it. But it's really about picking your intentionality and where you can have big wins.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so nice to observe you. We've had chats. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Women in STEM Week celebration, and you were there. Your kids were at home, but you were present and talking to everyone with a super calm voice and making it seem like such a breeze. Rob was wondering if you were doing a yoga pose at the same time, but we know that a lot of planning and intentionality goes into that. So, can you tell us to start off with? And before I wanted to thank you so much for matching with my banner. Like it's the exact same pic. It's awesome. I love it. Can you tell us about your life in general, your family, your career? Where are you in your like? What is your slice of life right now? What's the chapter of your life right now?
For sure. So, yes, as mentioned, I'm a mom of two. My younger one is 16 months old now, and my older one is 3.5. So, they're definitely a handful. It's a lot of fun, but they're a very, very busy age. I'm also an engineer, and I've been with ACCO actually for the last 11 and a half years. And I just started in a new position coming out of my second maternity leave after my second child as a senior engineer. So previously, I was more in an individual contributor type role. So in this role, I have a lot more pieces to play with integrating between different teams at a very high level. So there's a lot of things going on. Like I just came back to work. It was basically at the beginning of September. And so I've been in this new role for just a couple months now, and our kids were home during the entire pandemic. We pulled my older one out basically in March of 2020, and he had been home all the way up until uh, me returning back to work in the last couple months. So they were also transitioning to the new daycare life. So lots of moving parts for sure, all at the same time.
Yes, and you also have a pretty rich life with hobbies and also challenges that you were facing health wise, right? So we know you love belly dancing and we know you love tea, and you were also interested in growing things. I love watching on your social media how you're. I don't know if you're particularly interested in permaculture. You probably are on some level, but so tell us about. There you go. You're nodding your head. So tell us about your hobbies too outside of work, and also the other ball that you had to juggle because you faced some health challenges. So please do share with us.
Yeah, for sure. I guess we'll start with hobbies. So during the summer, for the most part, I do love gardening, especially vegetables. I do love flowers too, but vegetables have always been something. I think I kind of inherited that from both of my grandmothers. They were big. One on my dad's side, my dad's side of the family were on a farm, and my mom's side of the family, we're actually from Edmonton here, and she turned her entire backyard into a garden. And yeah, so permaculture, I found out about that a couple years ago. And since then, I've been trying to slowly take over our backyard, getting away from lawns basically into more of a sustainable type environment that's better for. Better for people and better for the environment. So now we have a couple apple trees, some fruit bushes, and I'm working on it's called a fruit guild. So you put in plants surrounding your bigger trees that help to support the ecosystem, and it helps to build the soil, and it's good for everyone basically. And my kids, you know, I love the fact that they can go out and they can pick stuff in their garden. They know what the plants look like that feed us every day. It's such a big thing. And I think part of it is, as you mentioned, I've had some health challenges, and food and nutrition is really important to me.
Yeah.
My health challenges are related to gastrointestinal, so stomach problems basically. And I think that it's just really put an importance on good quality food for me and my family. And it's just I almost feel like that's another love language that they probably should have added to the love language book, but it's the love of food, but also sharing good nutritious food with others is just
Yes.
something that's been important to me. And also, yeah, I mentioned both my grandmas, like that was a big thing. Um, so yeah, and the other hobby that you mentioned too is belly dance. So I started belly dancing. I think it's actually been almost 10 years ago now.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel like it's been that long. And things definitely changed over the pandemic. But luckily, one of the schools, so I did practice with local studios as well, but one of the schools that I was practicing with was already online. So at least that part was an easier transition. And it helped to transition through motherhood as well. Because sometimes, having to change into whatever your workout clothes are and maybe try to
Mhm.
look slightly more presentable, get into your car, leave your house, hope your kids are going to be okay while you're gone. Sometimes that's too much, especially at the
Yeah.
beginning. And
Yes.
yeah, so one of the things that I learned with all these hobbies is, 15 minutes counts. So, things get really busy, but if I practice belly dance for 15 minutes, sometimes it gives me enough energy and joy that I can continue on with the rest of my day and feel more relaxed, more calm, more creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you. And I love what you mentioned about food being a love language, because when I think about my husband, it's totally that. He loves cooking, and we've been blessed with the wonderful weather we've had, having friends over, neighbors over for cooking on the coals, and it lights him up so much. And it's really good for me too. I love hosting as well. So we've been loving buying meat from our local butcher and then making chimichurri. And we had a friend coming back who's Brazilian. So he came back from a trip and wanted to welcome him home. So we made like kind of more Brazilian themed fiesta. And so I totally agree that food is in itself an entire love language. It's true. It really brings us closely together. So thank you so much for telling us about you. I hope that for any mom who's listening, it can give you a bit of comfort. If you're pregnant or thinking about having a family and wondering what will your life look like when you're juggling kiddos and hobbies and specific challenges. We all have something that we're going through, whether it's health, whether it's caregiving for an elderly parent, whether it's a friend going through a crisis, whether it's our own crisis. Life is never 100% smooth, right? There's always something, a fire to put out, a fire to extinguish. So listening to Amanda's story, you can hear that you can thrive despite the more difficult circumstances that life throws your way, including having a child during a pandemic and facing health issues. So Amanda, tell us what has really helped you in terms of your mindset, your values, and your vision in terms of carving out that path and being really intentional about your choices. Can you tell us about your evolution in the last few years as you've become a mom, and what kind of work have you done internally, and what kind of support have you received along the way to get there?
Yeah, so I guess even in the introduction, it sounds like I'm doing a lot all the time. And I
Mm,
guess, there is bits of truth of that. I am a very busybody type person. It's easy for me to get overwhelmed. We were talking about that in the community as well. Like having a lot of interests can be an amazing gift, but it can also sometimes not be a gift. So with that, I guess, motherhood adds another level, and things will be fine. I think one of the things that my husband and I talked about early on, this was before, I think maybe while I was pregnant with my first child, so we didn't know at all what it was going to be like, but we
yeah.
decided, for the sanity of our own selves, we each needed a night off. So we said, no matter what happens going forward, we're going to try our best to support each other to have one night off. And so that was my night that I chose, was so that I would practice belly dance, whether it be at home or, going to a studio or something like that. And then for my husband, he does something, it's called fishing club, but they actually do like little tie flying for stuff, and they have different biologists that come in. It sounds really interesting, actually, a whole bunch of presentations. So we each chose something that we would do. And, I think that was really important because you need to carve out a little piece of sanity for yourself. So this was before we knew at all what parenthood was going to be like. I think the major things that happened really came from your program, Kenya. I came into the program not really. being sure what I wanted with my career. I didn't know, like, should I go the leadership route? Should I become a technical specialist? Should I, like all these questions. How is it going to be with like having another child? Um, what if I want to continue dancing? Will I even have time? So one of the first things that we did with the program that I think was really helpful was creating a vision and zooming out to 25 years.
Mhm.
It's really easy to get stuck in the day-to-day decisions if you can't see what you want for the future, long term in the future. So that was really helpful for me, and just realizing, that how important my family was to me, um, what type of contributions I did want to have to my career, and even, what type of impacts I wanted to have on the belly dance community or my own creativity. Like, why was I dancing? Why did I really want to do it? What did it add to my life? And same with all my other hobbies, right?
Yeah.
So we did that. And then also we did something called Defining Your Values. And it was really interesting because my husband and I both did it, and we had some values that were different from each other. So it was kind of a light bulb moment for me, actually, just realizing that some of the perpetual conflicts that we keep getting into are relating to some of these values that aren't
Mm.
completely lined up. And I think it helped our relationship as well, just to, acknowledge, okay, this is really important to you. It really is deep down important to you. And it's maybe not important to me, or vice versa. So I think in general, if you can zoom out, look at the big picture, and then try to figure out what is the most important to you, it helps cut down on the overwhelm, and it helps you to be more intentional with your time because you know what you're working towards. So instead of just, going day by day, just blindly, I found it really helpful to know at the end, this is who I want to be.
Yes. And you mentioned so many themes that I love, the values and the perpetual conflict. So when I talk with moms like you in our community, or and with like the close circle, and then also more broadly, people wonder, well, what happens with your partner, right? I'm doing this work, but then there's your partner too, and we say, okay, well, it's always best to do that work together. And when it comes to values, there are typically well, 2 to 3 scenarios. One where the values really overlap, some where the values slightly overlap and there's a difference, and some where the values actually, some spouses realize that there's a significant misalignment, right? And so it's interesting to hear your story, because then you have to find a way to co-honor each other's values and see, okay, we have some differences, but how do we make sure that I can be fully myself authentically and you can be there? And so have you found in the day to day, like, do you have a protocol or an approach when you realize, well, this is a source of perpetual conflict for us? And how are you actually tackling that? Are you just making peace with the difference? Does it keep on surfacing? Do you use humor? Do you compromise, or do you take turns about honoring your values? Is there a specific approach that you two take? You're both engineers, right? So it's a specific mindset that comes to the table.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes funny because now that we've both done the values game, sometimes I'll just feel like, oh, look, it's that value that doesn't really match up.
Yeah.
And so that, I guess that's a little bit of humor. It's also funny noting that, because we actually have health as one of our top values for both of us, but our definitions are a little bit different. So health for my
Mhm.
husband is just, being able to do what he wants, but it's more on a simultaneous, like, this is now kind of perspective, whereas for me, health is more of a long-term, long game. I plan to live to 100, and yes, I'm saying this recorded, I do plan to live on to 100. I have no science to back this or anything like that, but I think it's also just with my health struggles, and having intermittent flare-ups of the illness that I have, which can get very severe. I think for me, in some ways, preventing negative health outcomes has
Mhm.
become more important.
Yeah.
And so in dealing with relationships, I guess it's important to see what's in your ball court. So I'm not going to try to control what my husband eats while he's at work. I'm not going to control, what he decides to do, if he's going to go out or if he buys a giant bag of candy at work or whatever, right? Like, those are his choices. I'm just not going to worry about it. I'm just going
Yeah.
to stay in my lane, and I
Yeah.
worry about what I eat. I do a majority of the cooking for our family on the weekdays.
Yeah.
And then my husband does a lot of the cooking on the weekend. And we kind of, mutually just decided I'm cooking what I'm cooking on the weekdays. We kind of did come to some agreements. Like, for
Yeah.
example, there's certain family favorite meals and stuff like that. But as much as possible, we just stay in our own lanes. And I think that sometimes we add some humor to the situation, but it's nothing you can't overcome. I remember one really funny story. This is a very short story. When we were first moving in together, once we got married, we had the great milk dispute. So my husband wanted to buy homo milk, and I wanted to buy, I think, 1% or something like that. And I don't even drink dairy milk anymore, but we would like battle over it for weeks. And in the end, we realized, wait a second, we could just buy 2 smaller bottles of milk. Why are we fighting about this? So there's some funny things. Sometimes you have to be creative, but I think there's always a solution.
That's really funny. How silly, right? It's just milk you can buy two different cartons. I don't really drink dairy milk anymore, very rarely, but I transitioned from 2% to homo. And I realized it was much creamier, but again, I don't drink much dairy either anymore. Thank you so much for that, Amanda. No, stories actually really matter. They make everything come to life. I would like to ask you, and let's keep this chapter of the discussion pretty high level, just to be, fair and so in a male-dominated field, women may experience getting comments that might be eyebrow raising, that you wouldn't expect, or that you may consider bringing up to HR. So, how, based on your experience, what would you say to women? Because I understand that you may have observed or experienced yourself or witnessed something like that, or we've had discussions in our community about this, right? So, what would you say to a woman who's earlier in her career and perhaps is told she could be anything, and but then she enters a career like yours where you might sometimes be one of the only women at the table, and perhaps somebody says something that you would have never expected, right? That about motherhood, or about why somebody's in a certain position. Maybe it's based on their background and not on their competence. So that can be truly shocking in the moment, right? It can feel like a punch in the gut. You just may want to feel like crying. One of your core values may be violated, and it's probable that many women will experience that in the field. So what do you have to say on the topic? How would you encourage women to reflect on this, to approach this, to work through something like that?
Yeah, this is such a hard topic. And even, I've only been, I say only, but I mean, I've really only been working for not quite 12 years. And in that time, I can think of 3 examples actually in different forms or ways that were big violations, really, when it comes down to it. And I think whenever it's happened to me, or I've heard a story of it happening to someone else that I know, it is like you said, it's very shocking. I know for myself, I often don't know what to say. I sometimes give them the blank deer stare into the headlights look, like, and I don't think you can beat yourself up for whatever response that you give them in that moment. The thing is it comes down to a reflection of them, not on you. It's nobody should be judging what your response is in that moment, because it's a very hard situation.
Mm.
No matter what happens, I think it does depend on what type of scenario has happened. If it is reaching upon harassment or sexual harassment, I think that it's more important to bring it up to your HR and to your supervisor. And if you don't feel comfortable with that for whatever reason, at least make a document of it, that
Yes.
something has happened. Hopefully you have some close friends or family or colleagues that you can share your experience with, because any of these things, no matter how big or small, can be very shocking to your system, and
Yeah.
it can really shake your confidence. Women in general, like Kenny and I have talked about in the past, women have lower confidence typically than
Mhm.
men. And, sometimes when you have comments that are from, say, a male, and maybe even somebody who's superior to you, it can be very harmful to your own confidence. But I think in the end, you have to realize that it's probably nothing that you're doing. You're probably a threat to them. And in a horrible way, it's a sign that you should keep doing what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning the piece about confidence. We are discussing it in the community recently, and I had read a book, The Confidence Code, and the author was trying to really get to the root cause. What is so different in men and women's behavior? And one of the key findings was that for women, when there's a setback, a failure, or something difficult, they sit with that for much longer. Whereas men in general can brush it off much faster and take action much more rapidly, and kind of they move on. And so there's a compounding effect of that, right? So she was trying to get down to the confidence code. And that is the key piece, is just keep on taking action no matter what. I recommend that women take the maternal wall bias training. There's also gender bias bingo. There was an article, if you Google Science Mag, gender bias bingo, maternal wall bias. And maybe this will stick to any listener who might find themselves in this situation. But if somebody says something really inappropriate, you can pause and say, did I hear you say XYZ? Did you really mean that XYZ? And just kind of pause and observe, right? We may not have the instincts, because when somebody says something so shocking to us, sometimes we literally go into like this freeze mode. But I hope that perhaps this message will reach somebody who needs to hear it one day. Perhaps you'll do this maternal wall bias training. Prepare yourself that you will encounter some inappropriate comments. In fact, Amanda, I remember when, and I shared this with you, when I was 17 and I was chosen to go on an economic mission to China with Junior Team Canada, and me and a male colleague of mine were on the same competition team. And when I got the role, the position, I was one of the youngest people on this mission. He says, "Oh, it's because you're a girl." So I still remember it to this day, right? Around 20 years later. So these things really stick with us, no matter how tough we are, no matter how competent we are, no matter how many successes we've had. But just know that you're not alone in that, right? You're not alone. There are other women who have been there before you. And as many of us have discussed in the community, it says, you know what, the higher you go, the more criticism you're going to have. This is just to show that you're playing big. Keep on embracing that light inside of you. The world needs you. Amanda, let's talk about your vision, right? The life you're building, and what will your kids say about you in 25 years?
Yeah. So I really want my kids to remember the happy memories that we had. I don't necessarily have goals for them to be like super sports stars or anything like that. Like, I really want them to be able to discern what their own values are, and I really want to support them in whoever they become like as independent people. And so that might mean that they have different interests and talents than me, and I'm hoping that I will support them in whatever those things might be. I guess, like growing up, I grew up here, and my parents are actually from Canada as well, but we still have some of the Chinese culture in us. And I think that, one of those things where that we were always told is get an education, become a professional. You've heard the stereotypes of, the Chinese become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. And I mean, I did become an engineer. My mom's a pharmacist and my dad's an engineer. So we did kind of follow those stereotypes. But I've been trying to consciously work on being open to many things, because the future is not going to be the same as it is now. There's so many different opportunities that are going to be out there than what there is now. And I think that in general, what I want to help them find is their own values and their own vision. And that's really, in the long run, what my goal is. And hopefully we'll be able to do that through traveling once the pandemic ends. I think that traveling is a great opportunity to show, different cultures, different ways of doing things. It's really eye-opening and great to have an open mind. And even, on an environmental side, like there's a lot of tourism that's built around, seeing different animals or landscapes and that type of thing. But when it comes down to it, it's really, we only have this one planet, and caring for all of it is important. So I think it's a little bit of me sharing my values, but also hopefully allowing them to find their own special places in wherever they belong.
Absolutely. It's true. We don't there might be so many new jobs in 20, 25 years, right, that we have not been educated for. So imagination is going to be so important, creativity, being able to like learn on the fly. They'll probably be in a world of holograms and virtual reality. I'm already hearing from some of my friends who are wearing those augmented reality glasses and their meetings are in mountains. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy, right? I'll probably be able to clone ourselves in the future and have artificial intelligence make decisions like us as, you know, clone versions of us. It's almost it's exciting, but it's scary to think about. It also makes me want to live in the 80s again. I don't know if you do that, but I think back when my husband and I were decluttering our basement and going through some old stuff and mementos, and it just brings back a life. We grew up pretty much without the internet, right? No cell phones. We were running around outside. We didn't imagine that today. I think I was watching This Is Us, and have you watched the This Is Us?
I
Or
have not, no.
okay, I'll have to go on in parentheses because they kind of have these three generations of people, and one of the characters in the movie, his father developed some of the coding that allowed the transmission of video and imagery. So you go back into the past where he was coming home late and his wife was complaining, when are you going to spend time with the kids? And he was just so fascinated by this cosine equation. And then they jump into the future as their, you know, relatives watch each other on FaceTime during labor and delivery because of the pandemic, right? So it's just so crazy to think that not so long ago, people were building the technology that we have never imagined. So in 30 years, our kids will be teaching us stuff and making fun of us for being so obsolete. Right?
For
So
sure.
yeah, it's funny. It's interesting to think about that. Amanda, I wonder, do you have any reflections for moms who are and dads? Right, we talk about fathers too, and I know that you do some of the work with your husband, and our participants talk with their husbands about the work that they do in the community. But as we think of transitioning, let's say from being pregnant to maternity leave and then back to work, do you have any tips for women who really want to be intentional about preserving their personal brand and how they show up at work as a mother, as a pregnant woman? What kind of signal do they want to send to their employers while being authentic and understanding that their life is really about to change and it's a big mystery? So what kind of tips would you give women, whether engineers or in other field, on how to plan that transition, make a good impression on your colleagues, be authentic, and work with your partner to make it a success?
So I guess there's a few things. I think first of all, you have to do the internal work yourself. So you have to figure out what you really want. And it can be hard because it's, you see, it is a big upcoming change and you won't really know what it's like until after it happens, no matter how many books you read or how many people you talk to. It's just one of those things you can't imagine it until it happens. So I think it's important to sit down and with your partner as well and just figure out what you want. So one of the things that we talked about, my husband and I, was that we wanted to split our parental leave.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different reasons for that, right? And I think because we were clear on the type of people we wanted to be and the type of family that we were trying to build, some of those decisions became a little bit easier. But it's important to sit down and try to figure out, what options are there even. Um, do you want to have a shorter leave as long as possible because your kids are young at the time? You can have split parental leaves where like the mom has a leave first and then the dad has a leave after. You can have leaves where both parents are on leave at the same time. And we've actually done it both two different ways. In the first maternity leave, I took a leave and then my husband took a leave. And then the second time around, we actually both took this last summer off. And that was really amazing. So first, I guess you have to figure out what you want and also, think about your career as well. Things are going to be busier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to put a break on your career either. It just means that you might need to be creative with support systems. And I think you asked me to talk about that earlier and I kind of missed talking about it, but support systems are super, super important, especially after you have kids, like you have to decide what things you're going to spend your time on. And if it's work or spending time with your family, or if it's cleaning your house and reorganizing your cupboards and all those other things. There's not enough time to do everything, unfortunately. So I guess you have to first, yeah, go back to thinking about what you really want. And then one of the things that I did once I had that picture was actually meet with my supervisor. And it wasn't to tell him that I was going to have a house cleaner, not by any means, but I mean, in terms of your career, like I wanted to tell him, like this is how long I'm planning to take a leave for. These are the types of things that I want to do when I return from my leave. And I felt it was important in my role anyways, and with my company and the relationship I had with my supervisor to portray that my career was important. And I don't know, that might not be as important in all companies and depending on where and what type of place you work in. But for me, I felt it was important to really show them that I was a dedicated person. And maybe that came from a little bit of lack of confidence as well, maybe in myself or something. I mean, I'm sure that we could dig into that super far, but I felt it was just something that was important. And I also wanted to outline what type of contact I was going to have during my leave with my group and with my supervisor. And I chose to actually stay fairly in touch with the whole team. I joined some of our group meetings just to find out how things were going. And I found that really beneficial. And in this last maternity leave, actually, my supervisor, I started asking, I was like, like, is it possible to get promotions in our group? Do you see it? Because our group is really small. Business wise, there might not be a business need. Is it possible? And so we started having those conversations. And in the end, it comes down to, it doesn't necessarily matter what the business needs are. It does if you're actually going to get the promotion, but you can start working at the next level. Even if you don't have the title, right? And that helps to show your company that you are ready. So my supervisor, and this is during my leave, my supervisor and I started talking about different things that I could start doing that would be at that next level that would help me progress. And even if, the promotion itself, the title wasn't for, down the road or whatever, at least I could show that I was doing those things. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, for women, it might be more necessary than for men. Is probably relating to confidence. It's a lot easier to say, I can do this job that's at a higher level if you've already done some of the tasks.
Right.
It's a lot easier to say, I provide value to the team if you're already providing some of that value.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and if your supervisor isn't that supportive, like, you can think of some of these things on your own too, and just try to get projects that might give you more exposure or different skills and stuff like that. So I think that was a really key conversation that I had, because then it got the ball rolling. And it ended up after that he encouraged me, like, apply for these other roles that have a promotion. And so that's how I ended up getting the position I'm in now. I ended up applying to a couple different positions and then accepting one of them. But it all started with knowing what I wanted as a working mom.
So good. So much gold in this response. My mind was racing. I wanted to hop on when you were talking about the confidence piece and maybe, women need to do it more or however. Based on what we talk about in the community, we're being very proactive about your personal brand, and managers may not even have the training or be aware of what a parent is experiencing. Some of them are not parents, have not experienced the transition. Maybe they're not supported at a higher level to manage those transitions. Sometimes policies can be like fluid or hard to understand, or they might be understaffed. So by actually managing upwards, which is what you did, it's great. You're positioning yourself. You're making your boss's job easier. You're making it easier to identify the opportunities for you. You stayed connected because it was good for your mental health and your professional development, right? So, and yes, I'm a big proponent of reality-driven development. Is it fair that women may have to advocate for themselves more? That's a completely different discussion. But at the end of the day is, what do you want and what are you willing to do to get there, right? And kind of how do you want to treat yourself in the process? And so your story just illustrates so well what is possible when you make that reflection on what do you want, not what everybody told you should be, not what like society's definition of success is, not what your parents' definition of success is, but what do I want? What feels right in my body? What feels good intellectually, emotionally? So many layers. We may not land on an answer for every single piece, but as you said, you just get the ball rolling, right?
Yeah, and I
So
think like sometimes you definitely won't know, but once you set that intention, you'll find
mhm,
the pieces. Like there are guides out there that can help you to do some back to work planning, or like engineers like Canada has a guide with parental leave in it, and that can give you some tips. But I think unless you've already had the thoughts, you might not know to look for them. So I think
absolutely.
once you have those intentions, the resources and the steps will come because you're looking.
Well, and I'd say, having experienced my own transitions, is don't assume that anybody will hold your hand. That's the tough part. Is people may wish you well and say, hey, see you in 12 months. Or for me, it was like, have those 2 donuts, right? You're eating for two, and it was before the pandemic, which in itself is, anyway, that's another story. But I had a lot of assumptions about how things would be, because we have all these discussions about diversity and inclusion. I kind of thought that would fall under that and there would be support, but not necessarily. People don't necessarily know how to manage those transitions in a way that would, where we can leverage them to be leaders, right? And kind of see them as a growth opportunity, versus like policy says we can't talk or whatever. And you mentioned something really important about communication. The onus is on the employee to communicate how much they want to be in touch, because by default, you may be shut off for policy reasons or whatever, right? So it's very important to say, you can have a communication plan and say, okay, please reach out to me by email, by phone, if this happens, if there are promotion opportunities, if there's a restructuring happening or something like that. And also your plan might change, so you may want to stay in touch, but then you realize, like, no, I want nothing to do with work. And so it's very important to be open to the communication plan changing. Amanda, thank you so much for your time. We'll be wrapping up the conversation. You're quite active on social media, actually. So if people want to learn more about you, your interests, the causes you care about, I know you support some causes too. Like, we didn't dive into that today, but that could be for another conversation. But where can people follow you, find you, if they want to learn more about your values, how you're trying to make the world a better place, your hobbies, and just being an engineer and a mom?
Yeah, I guess the best place is probably on LinkedIn, and then also in the Pros and Babes Facebook community. You can probably find me in there as one of the members to connect through Facebook that way. But yeah, either LinkedIn or through the Pros and Babes community.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's such an honor to journey with you, and I will see you backstage in just a second. For those of you listening, if you found this conversation insightful or helpful, and you know anybody who may need this reflection or advice, please direct them to our podcast, our Facebook group, and please leave us a review on iTunes if you find that this podcast is worthy of sharing. Have a wonderful rest of your